You are listening to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida.
Hello, and welcome to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Argersinger, and this is my co-host, Kelly Allen. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Tom. On the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, we explore how we as Jesus followers can connect the dots between education, contemporary culture, and biblical theology, and live like Jesus in a broken and challenging world. And it's summer, Tom.
It's summer. I can't believe it's summer.
I know.
But it is summer.
I know.
May just rushed past.
It really did. It really did. It was so crazy. May is always so crazy.
And so summer is a good thing for some folks, but there's other folks it can be a challenge because, well, it's just different.
We have our kids now.
Oh, there's that.
Our kids are home.
We have our kids are home, and then the question arises, what do we do?
Exactly.
At this point?
Exactly.
That's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Yes. I have a lot of questions for you.
And I probably have a handful of answers, and so you probably have as many answers as I do. But yeah, so just, why don't we get into it? So what would you like to talk about?
Well, what is summer? Why do we have summer?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure, but what I think is the case, historically, is the whole idea of this summer vacation, what the British system used to call the long vacation, actually was an agrarian thing. I think, so I think it evolved out of an agrarian calendar.
Okay.
And so once schools started, there were still a lot of kids who were involved in, back in the early 1900s. Yeah. Late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a lot of kids who were still involved with that lifestyle, and so I think that was part of it. Yeah. But then I think it got popularized through the British system, where we've inherited a lot of things from Britain. Yeah. And legal things and various things, and so this idea of the long vacation came into play, which always sounded like so romantic to me when I was like, yes. The long vacation. Yeah. And then we never really had any money to do long vacations. Yeah. So I was like, well, okay, that's great. Yeah. So, but so I think that's where it came from.
Yeah. I get the sense that it's needed, like by teachers and students.
Agreed, yeah.
And so, but as a parent, I just think, what do I do with my children? What's the best schedule that I could have them on? Should they be scheduled? Should they, should they be busy?
Yeah. And what does that really mean?
Yeah. What are the best practices to put in place for my child?
I want to talk about that. One of the quick thing I guess we can kind of jump into that. That's fine. So best practices. Well, sometimes it helps to think about our thinking a little bit. We do that a lot in these podcasts, and that is, what is the root of the question? So what are the best practices for our kids in order to prepare them for next year? Yeah. Great question. Don't get me wrong. It's an awesome question. But what does the question say about how we're thinking? Yeah. Why do we care about best practices? That kind of a thing.
Yeah, I guess, I would say because we care about our children, and we want the best for them.
We want the best for them.
I want to make sure I'm doing my best as a parent for my child.
Right. Yeah. And then hearkening back to a previous episode, that is great when the pillar's standing upright.
That's true.
And then when it tilts, so I'm not saying we are going to talk about this, and I'm not trying to denigrate the topic or anything. Yeah. I'm just simply saying it's interesting to think about how we even phrase and talk about these things. So I think you're right. I think we do best practices because we want our kids to succeed. Yeah. I mean, what would be the opposite, right? We want them to fail? No. Yeah. And there's a certain amount of hoop jumping people have to go through in school. And so I remember one of our kids struggled greatly with spelling, for instance. And just they were not a natural speller. I think I came to believe over the years that some people are basically naturally good spellers and some people are not. Right. And the ones who are naturally not good spellers, people tend to give them a lot of rules to figure out how to spell better. Yeah. So you got the I before E, except after C, and that kind of stuff. But for our kid, that didn't really help. The rules and everything really didn't help. So one summer we decided, well, we're going to tackle this. Yeah. And so I had the advantage of having a little bit of experience in education, et cetera. Yeah. So, but anyone could do it if they thought of it, I suppose. But I sat down and said, how do you, she said, Dad, you're a really good speller. How did you learn how to spell? And I said, well, I did learn the rules, but I really can see the word in my head. I take a picture of the word, and then I can call that picture to mind, even though I'm not basically a visually oriented person. Yeah. And she said, oh, well, I never thought about it that way. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, well, here's this word. Just take a look at this word and just take a picture of that in your head. Okay, now look at that, close your eyes, look at that picture, and spell the word to me. Mm-hmm. It was like a life changer for her.
Wow.
And it's a simple idea, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes those little things. So after having questioned the question, I can say, yeah, I mean, we do want our kids to grow. We want them to learn. We want them to, and best practices, I think the idea of best practices is we don't want to have to waste a lot of time. Mm-hmm. We want to find the most efficient way to do this.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, just taking the summer to really work on things with your child that they're struggling in. I know my children struggle in various things. And so I guess I'm always looking for like a good resource or something to help them in those areas. And sometimes I'm like, I don't have any resources for this particular area. Yeah. But I like how, you just really worked with her in that area and just got creative. Yeah.
We also used to get those books, if you ever go to Barnes, I know, again, my age comes out, books, written material. Actually, we would go to Barnes & Noble, we buy for your fourth grader, for your third grader, like summer book. Yeah. And there are a few times we worked through those. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting, because now with our kids all being adults, the youngest being, I think, 24-ish, 25, has said basically, regardless of their personality, they kind of appreciated that. Yeah. Which is kind of interesting.
I would think so, because it gives them an edge for next year, for the following year.
Yeah.
They're not behind.
I think it did do that, but I don't think that's how they remember it so much as the greatest value. For them, I think the greatest value was simply that, well, one of the values was it brought structure, a little bit of structure to what can be a really, really unstructured time. And I'd love to know what you think about the structure issue, but in just a second. Yeah. But it also, frankly, I think it was also an opportunity for us to connect.
Quality time. I was thinking they probably did appreciate that quality time.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And we would sit down with a book, and they would go and we would work through together. And we tried to have a lot of laughs with it, and it wasn't like super intense. But they did learn things, and it did prepare them, and so there was some growth, and we did kind of zero in on some things that were hard, as we said. Yeah. But functionally, I think we just hung out.
Yeah. Yeah, you just really devoted some time towards what they needed, and I think that says something.
And then during that season, there were not as many distractions as there are today. We didn't have personal digital devices, et cetera. So it was just a different world in that way. So, but I think in that respect, it was good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what do you think about? I'm curious to know what you think about the structure. So, no structure, like organic. Everything just evolves.
Honestly, that's my nature.
Is that
and
it?
Not everybody that listens to the podcast is like that. Some people wake up and they're like, we're doing this, we're doing this.
Right, yeah.
I am not like that. I am naturally, I get up and I'm like, well, what are we going to do today? Like, if I don't have like a system already in place that I've thought about ahead of time, I don't get much done, honestly. And so unfortunately, my kids fall into that. And so I don't think that that's necessarily healthy. I think that I'm always striving to provide structure for my children because naturally I'm not a structured person.
So when you get up, and this is fascinating. So when you get up in the morning and you say, what are we going to, kind of implying I don't know what I'm going to do today. It's going to have to evolve, sort of. Right. Right? Yeah. So does that bring you anxiety or joy?
I think a little bit.
Does that make you, is that great for you?
Gray?
Great. As in, great. This is really great. This is awesome.
Sometimes
I don't know what I'm going to do then.
Just to be honest, I need that day. I need like a day to have nothing on my plate. But yeah, I think in life in general that brings anxiety to me because I'm like, I need to get things done. Okay. I don't want to waste time with my children. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's true. Yep. Yeah. And so I wonder, just out of curious, this is a weird question, right? But I wonder if someone like 100 years ago or 50 years ago would have had that same response. In other words, if they were naturally more organic, let's say, and with their time and everything, I wonder if they would ever even ask that question?
I don't know. I went to art school, and there was a lot of embracing it. I'm
embracing the organicness.
Embracing the organicness. I had professors that were late, and they said, I guess I'm just rebelling against this time. And I'm like, that's not necessarily productive.
Well done. I got to remember that.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
It reminds me of being in developing countries around the world that are just operate in a completely different time scale.
Yeah. I could, Italy has the siestas. I could totally go for that.
Yeah, right. I mean, that would be an awesome thing, right?
Yeah.
I remember people literally, they'll, even with churches, they'll come in, an hour and a half late for church, and nobody says a word.
I know.
They just kind of, whenever it seems like there's a critical mass of people, the pastor stands up and here we go.
Yeah.
Whereas here, everybody's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, come on,
Exactly.
that kind of thing.
And I'm the one slipping in when the music starts playing because I'm late.
Right. So there are good things about that. It makes us very productive, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so back to maybe circling back to the actual question, are there practices? I think so. I think there are some that are more helpful than others. We've kind of touched on the idea of, from an academic standpoint, finding some resources. I know CCS does provide some resources.
Yeah, they do the vacation station.
Right. That's helpful.
Provide resources in that way.
And there's lots of other things. I mean, just Googling, there's a ton of other things that you can do. But I think keeping the balance between, I think for me, a lot of life is about balance. And I think summers are that way too. I know, like, for example, this is what I hear from, and see if this resonates with you. I hear this from a lot of parents. My purpose this summer is to keep my kid busy. Right.
And see, I think that you can go too far in that direction. I like what you're talking about, balance. So I'm careful with that as well. When I first, I think I was telling you before, when I first became a parent, I was the director of an after school. So I knew how to structure a kid's day.
Right.
And so when I first became a parent, that's what I wanted to do for my child.
Yes.
I wanted to have music time, art time, spelling,
right,
stuff like that. But
it was like homeschooling almost.
It was like homeschooling.
Yeah.
But I think you can go too far in
How did that go,
direction.
by the way? How did it work?
Well, by the time I had my second kid, I was like...
I'm over it.
Just too much.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
The other thing my kids will say nowadays when we talk about this around the Thanksgiving table or whatever it is, the other thing I did besides with the books from Barnes & Noble is I'd give them schedules. And I'd say, look, what we don't want here is we don't want you sleeping till 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So you need to get up at a reasonable time. You need to go to bed at a reasonable time, and there's flexibility in that. But we don't want this. We don't want you to be a bum. That's kind of our family lingo for being lazy.
Yeah.
We don't want you to be a bum.
Yeah.
And so, and then you need to have some time with the Lord at some point during the day, and you need to have some time to do your work, because our family was really big on chores and this kind of things. We'll talk about that in a minute. But and so there was kind of a loose. There were blocks, sort of what they now is big rage, right? Blocks and scheduling. It's a really popular way to schedule your time.
Okay.
It's kind of what we did.
Yeah.
And then there's time for just whatever, just fun and relaxation, napping, But we try to teach our kids, don't be afraid of downtime.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of silence. Don't be afraid of space. And if you get bored, that's sometimes a really good thing because that often sparks creativity. So I think that reality, I think, was helpful. Again, even though our kids, I'm not saying they loved it all the time, I'm saying overall when they look back on it, they would say, I think, and they can write in the comments here, I suppose, if they listen to the podcast, and say it was worthwhile because it did give some loose structure to the day, and they still had agency. They still had choices.
They could pick when they could do those things as long as they got them all done. What if they didn't get those done?
We just didn't feed them. No, it's not true. I mean, we'd have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And actually, it was not that close of accountability. It wasn't like we sat down in the evening and went,
Did you?
Check.
Yeah. Okay.
Check. It really wasn't that.
Gotcha.
It was really just more, even though it was a structure, it was more organically imposed sort of, or in place.
Yeah.
And so we literally were trying to do it for the good of the kids.
Right.
For their good and their development of character, because being able to stick to some kind of a schedule is a part of having a strong character, I think.
Yeah.
Because especially when you're reporting to other people and you have responsibilities, and if you're all by yourself, it's maybe a little different. So I think that movable block kind of idea was useful for us. I'm not saying it works for everybody.
Yeah.
But we had
because I have one child that would just totally not do it.
Just like don't do it at all.
Like they would just be like, "Oh, I forgot."
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I think that dives into the question of, are there, you know me, I'm always popping up to 50,000 feet, which is so annoying. So I'll avoid doing that. I was going to say something, it's like, no, it's a little too big picture. So the question is that okay?
Right. No, it's not.
Okay. So that means you're going to have to discipline somebody.
Yeah.
For not doing the schedule.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if
But you're saying your kids weren't like that.
No, I'm not saying that they didn't push back on it.
Gotcha.
They did. I'm trying to remember if I ever had to discipline them, like literally take things away. I don't remember necessarily doing that. I'm sure at some point we had to do something, but the purpose of the schedule was not to elicit that, in other words, it wasn't just to force someone to do what they didn't want to do.
Gotcha.
And so I do remember, now that I'm thinking about it, there was a conversation with the kids ahead of time, and there was some involvement in the process.
Yeah.
And maybe that's helpful, to be able to say to that kid, well, first of all, if the kid's just going, well, I'm just not going to do that at all. Well, then I guess the question is, is there some kind of a rebellious spirit in there? I mean, there could be another whole set of situations going on behind the scenes that this is just sort of the face of it, but there's more. Yeah. But aside from that, it could be just the kid needs a little more involvement in the process.
Right.
Especially nowadays.
Process. I like that.
Yeah, it used to be people back in the day would just go, just like in jobs, if you were the boss, you would go, hey, do this. Yeah. It was very directive. Yeah. And parenting was very, hey, do this. Culture has evolved and the people have evolved in certain ways where that's less helpful in some ways, less effective. Yeah. Although I still think in parenting there's a time to be directive, in my opinion. But I
think for something like this, though, my kids would really benefit for being involved in that process. Say, hey, this is what we would like. What's your feedback on that, and how can we work together to get this done.
And why are we doing it?
Yeah, and this is why we're doing it.
There's a reason why we're doing this. It's because we don't want you to grow up to be bums. Or we want you to be mums now. We want you to actually because ultimately it's better for you to have it's better for pretty much every human being to have some sort of a structure. At the end of the day. Because otherwise our sin nature just takes over. Yeah. Right? And then whatever feels good, we're going to spend all of our time doing that, right? Exactly. We're going to eat all the ice cream, we're going to binge all the Netflix things, whatever it is that kind of floats our boat, that's what we're going to prioritize in our life. So if we're going to live a gospel-centered life, especially, but even just living a healthy life. Well, that was the other thing we talked about. I remember now, this is all coming back. It's like a bad drink. No, it wasn't. It's not that bad. But it was exercise. Okay. So I'm like, you know what? You cannot just lay on the couch all day or whatever. You have to actually, because they were in sports all year, but then during the summer, we really didn't do that much for various reasons, money and various other reasons. And so I remember that was the hardest thing. That was to get them engaged and outdoors. Yeah. I think that's actually really important. I think getting kids outdoors and active is actually really important. It's a lot harder in Florida than it was in New York. Yeah. Just weather-wise. Yeah. So that's tricky. But I think movement is really, but I don't necessarily think it has to be organized movement.
Right. Yeah, like run a mile a day today.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Or does everything? This is another whole probably podcast topic at some point. Is everything about team sports? It's like that's it. Right. Everything. That's the only way people can move. It's like no, that's just one way people can move. It's a great way. Yeah. But it's just one way.
I tell you what, I had so much joy yesterday watching all of my kids. I have elementary student, middle school, and high school.
Yeah, you
student.
got the whole gamut.
Yes, playing on. We have a water slide. So they're playing on this big blow-up water slide, and they get the dish detergent out. So it's like bubbles on water slide. And I'm like, how fun is that? Like, that's summer to me.
Was it hypoallergenic? I'm just asking.
No, it could burn their eyes totally. But they're fine.
So we're confessing here. Okay. Yeah. But see, that's a great example, right? Yeah. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be really complicated necessarily. Right. And some people like, things like fishing, hunting, and boating or whatever. I mean, the point is getting outside, I think, is healthy for kids because I think that helps them disconnect from the screens like we talked about. Yeah. So I think that's a really, really, really important thing. I think another thing, this seems like the day for controversial topics. So one of my things was get kids reading.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, because the average American today reads less than one book a year.
Right.
And probably half of those people are listening to them audio, which is, I think, fine.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, reading is not as much a thing. Mm-hmm. So I got to ask you, is reading a thing in your house?
Okay, only because of CCS. Literally.
Boy, I have somebody to blame. That's excellent.
No, I actually have benefited from that so much because not only just watching my daughter, do the summer readings, like I love that they are required to do that.
Yeah.
And the books that she has been reading in middle school, Pilgrim's Progress, stuff like that, it's gotten me into reading personally. So I think just because of CCS, our family has kind of embraced the reading. Now, I think I was telling you earlier, one of my children really struggles with it, and I think is probably at least a year behind from where they need to be.
Right.
And so getting them, interested. It's really hard. Yeah.
And that's a whole different, that brings up the controversy. I was just listening to this about, is reading anything the same as reading really good literature, that kind of stuff. I was just listening to a podcast last night when I was exercising, and it was this Navy SEAL guy, and he was talking about, at one point he was talking about how much he hated high school English.
Yeah.
He just hated it because it was forcing him to read books that he wasn't interested in. And I'm trying to think of one of the ones he listed. I can't remember, but the whole idea of I was forced into it, and therefore I hated reading. And it wasn't until I got to graduate school, and the same thing in college, and then I got to graduate school, and I was allowed to read what I wanted to read.
Yeah.
And therefore I was much more engaged.
Okay.
Which is and it's like, you know what? It's like, yes.
Yeah.
Everybody's more engaged in stuff they like.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that reading a book that's more challenging or that you're not particularly... First of all, there's the whole idea of discovery. Sometimes you discover something you're interested in by reading a book you would not normally do.
Exactly.
Of course, people do that now by scrolling, although there doesn't usually happen. The real interest doesn't really come. It's just like, oh, cool, and then moving on. But I'm talking about a real interest, and sometimes people discover things through the process. So I don't want this to be a whole polemic about reading, but I do think, though, the statistics are pretty clear that reading good sentences and good paragraphs and good literature in general, whatever that genre is, whether it's old or new, the point is it does train your mind. It trains you to think better. Trains you to speak better, it trains you to write better, and I think those are still skills that matter.
Yes.
So that's my advertisement for reading.
Oh, yeah. I think CCS does that very well, especially with the summer reading, and when they're younger, it's pages. They can they can read whatever. That's right. But it's just the pages read.
That's right.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I got to ask you this question. I didn't preface this. I didn't say this ahead of time. So do you guys do chores?
Yes.
In your home? Tell me about how you do chores.
Okay, so my kids will tell you they don't have very many chores. However, they are in charge of maintaining their space. So they do their own laundry. They have to make their bed every morning. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't. Just maintaining their space. You're not going to walk into their room, It like every night their room has to be cleaned.
That was kind of our rule too.
Yeah. So, and then occasionally they'll help with like dishes and stuff like that, but that's not like a regular thing. But
so it's mostly their own thing.
It's maintaining their space and doing their laundry. That's a big deal for them. Plus, you know, during the year doing homework.
Do they make their own lunches during school?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. See, yeah, we did that. I mean, and it's so funny because I've said that to some people, and some people go, "You make them do that?" I mean, how is that fair? It's like, you live here.
Yes.
You know, and this is an old guy moment, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, you're here. You're under our roof. It's okay for you to contribute.
Exactly. And honestly,
even beyond your own stuff.
I can't keep up with it all. So they need to contribute.
No, right?
No, especially with laundry.
Well, we had 4 kids.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there is that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting though, so many people I've talked to, the basic concept of having kids do those things. Mm-hmm. They don't agree with the concept. Yeah. Which is interesting because the idea seems to go, but they're just kids. They're supposed to have fun.
And that was my mother's mentality.
Oh, okay.
And so I think just seeing myself struggle as an adult, I didn't want that to happen for my kids.
Okay.
Because my mom did my laundry till I was like 17, you know, until I moved out, you know. And so I really wanted to see them manage that. And so in our house, when they're 10, they do their own laundry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not so much how mature they are, it's the age.
It's the age.
Which is just an easy way to do it.
It is. Yeah, I'm kind of systematic like that. It's like, each of them when they're 10, that's when they start doing their laundry.
You know, what's interesting is that a lot of the stuff we talk about, and we're going to talk about a couple other things here, I think, before we close, requires attention. Mm-hmm. It requires intention, and it requires attention. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where a lot of people today fall down.
Right.
They have to discipline, the adult has to discipline themselves to keep track. Mm-hmm. And that means discipline.
Yes.
And I wonder if part of the challenge with all of this stuff, I wonder if the reason why some people lean towards let's just roll and be organic is because at the end of the day they don't want to engage with that, you know, in themselves.
Right.
And I'm gonna have to keep track of this. I don't know,
true.
But maybe some of that is for some people.
Sometimes it's easier to do it yourself than to ask your child to do it as well. Yeah.
Chores were big in my house. I mean, huge. And I had to work with my dad and didn't get paid. You know, all through until he passed away when I was 15. But up to that point, he was a mechanic. And so we would work together all the time. And he would give me a quarter. I mean, it was a long time ago, like early 70s, but still, it was a quarter.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, Dad, you just gave me a quarter for working like 4 hours. And for him, it was nothing about them. Of course, we didn't have much money anyway, but it was not about the money. It was about the symbol. Yeah. He's like, thanks. Here's your quarter. Today, it'd be like giving somebody, you know, I don't know, a $5 bill or whatever nowadays. But the point was not the money. The point was I spent time with him. He needed help. That was the point, actually, because it was a different day. It wasn't about, hey, I'm going to hang out with you. My dad really wasn't that guy. Yeah. And so it was more like, I need help. Go to the garage. Yeah. You know, it was that kind of thing. Yeah. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it. Did I learn a lot? Yeah. Learned a tremendous amount.
Yes. I can imagine that was very valuable.
Yeah, it was valuable. Life. And so I think that setting up some kind of a chore system for the summer, I think could be really helpful. Okay. Even though it does bump up against some of the cultural zeitgeist that we have going out, right? The cultural norms and things. Right. Where the point of summers is often to create situations where the kids can be more entertained. In other words, it's really all about them, as opposed to maybe but partly about contribution to the household. Right. Well, and then so if a kid says, well, I don't want to do that. Okay. Well, wait, but again, what all this does is so interesting because it all reveals our value systems. Yeah. What do we really value? You know, and it's a hard thing, which kind of gets me thinking about more of the religious side of things. Yes. I'd like to spend a little bit more time. Remember our last couple minutes here talking about religion and how that, and Christianity particularly, what happens during the summer, like especially if you're attending a Christian school and you're not in school, so you lose that daily engagement with God's word and all that kind of stuff, where it's kind of, in a sense, not done for you, but it's done with you.
Yeah.
And then what happens? So do you notice a difference in your kids during the summer as far as their spiritual practices and things like that?
So they have their own devotionals.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a bedtime thing. They read it and spend some time with God at nighttime.
Nice.
So that doesn't change over the summer.
Oh, okay.
But, they are missing, they have Bible class every day. And so I feel guilty because, we don't have like Bible time as a family daily, even though I think they would greatly benefit from that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would love to be able to say with all honesty that we were awesome with the family devotion thing. I mean, sometimes people look at me and the jobs that I've had, the careers I've had, or the callings that I've had, and go, "Oh, that's so disappointing, man." That's like, why don't you do? And I don't exactly know. All I know is that for our particular family, well, I'll say I can own that as the dad and say, I didn't really make it happen. I attempted it many times,
right?
But we could never figure out a way to, because we were always striving in our household, we were always striving for how do we make Jesus a daily living reality in our home?
Yeah.
That was kind of our mantra. Not because I think you've heard me say before that I think one of the greatest hindrances to gospel-centered living in America today is compartmentalization. The idea that I do this over here. I go to church. So 2/3 of people who claim Christ go to church, more or less. That's declining some, and depends on which statistic you look at, ever since COVID and everything. So, you have all that. But at the end of the day, is it a life that we're living? And the kids are watching.
Yeah.
They are totally watching. When you look at the statistics, there are 51 million kids under the age of 18 in America, and 40 million of those don't know Christ. So the other 11 million kids are all over the block as far as what they think and what they believe. But what's really, so there's weird statistics like if you poll parents, and this has been done, if you poll Christian parents, or actually any parent, they're going to say teaching values is one of my biggest jobs as a parent.
Right.
It's primarily my role. Huge percentage of people will agree with that statement. Then at the same time, they will also say that it's really about the church. It's the church's job. So different poll, different question. It's the church's job to teach them these biblical values. And then often if you attend a Christian school, it's the Christian school's job to teach them biblical values. And so what you end up seeing at the end of the day is this idea that this was a question on one of George Barna's polls recently, said the majority of parents spend zero time talking about God during their day with their kids. Zero. Not saying it's easy, I'm just saying it's necessary.
Right.
I think, how do you make God a daily living reality? Well, I wish I had one of my kids here, because I'm not saying we did it all right we didn't. But what we can say is that a number of our kids will say, you know what, God just came up in conversations. You didn't have to make a list going, hey, today, make sure you talk about God.
Right.
So I'm not saying that supplants or should supplant the family devotion time, because I actually believe in that.
Right.
And I regret that we didn't do that better. We did do it. We would have things called family meetings. Yeah. And we would incorporate some devotions in that. Yeah. But I do think, though, that what the kids would say is, when stuff happened, when life happened, Jesus came up. Or sometimes in just random conversations, Jesus would come up. Yeah. And I think that's helpful. Yeah. I think that's really helpful.
I think that's living out your faith in front of your child.
Yeah. 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 And I think somehow it's very, very important, I think, that we like if I had a subscript or a tagline for gospel-centered education or gospel-centered living in general, is connecting life in God with life in the world. And that's where I think a lot of people really fall down. That connection doesn't happen. Their life in God is over here. Their life and their business and their parenting or whatever is over here. How they interact with people is over here. And there is a divide or a chasm in between those. Or maybe just a little veneer over here. But that's not the kingdom. That's not what God wants for us. He wants us to say, look, I'm surrendering my life to you, and therefore every area of my life is supposed to fall under the lordship of Christ 24 hours a day. And that's a good thing, not an onerous, terrible thing. And so when I think about the summer, I think, what an awesome time that we still have this, quote, long vacation. That kids have this long vacation because it's an opportunity to actually connect with those kids one-on-one, to spend time. Take them out in the woods, take them somewhere, do something where you can just have time to talk with those kids. Listen. Just listen. The funny joke in our family was the best way to hear our kids and what they were actually thinking was to drive them somewhere. And they were sitting in the back of the van.
Yeah, that's
you ever have this
true.
happen? Where they're saying all this stuff and you can hear all of it, but they would never say this if they thought you were listening.
Yeah, they don't know you're listening.
That's right. So you learn all this stuff. So I think that's important. And then if Jesus is not a living daily reality in your home, a vital presence in your home, the problem isn't with your kids. It's with you. And that's something you're going to have to come to the Lord with and go, I don't know what's happening here, but I need help with this. I want to do this better, et cetera. Because nobody does it perfectly. Yeah. I certainly didn't. But you have to be bent towards it. You have to want it.
I like your point about like bringing it up in conversation, because I fall into, like, I have my personal walk with the Lord. Yeah. I encourage the kids to have a walk with the Lord. They have their devotions and everything, but you know, I remind them to read their devotional, and sometimes I'll get, did you read yours?
Oh,
you know?
Nice.
And so,
but
but they're holding me accountable, but I haven't shared. Well, yeah, I have, you know, and that's when it goes to, we need to be having more family conversations about this. Yeah. You know, he's in everything for me. But do they know that? Right.
Yeah. And just sharing what you're learning, I think is very profound for people, you know. And again, I know I just said this, but I want to hasten to say this again. This is not me coming from this space that I've got all this figured out. Right. You can look at our family and you can see that, you know, we don't have it all figured out in this area, but what I do know, that there are principles that are true. Yeah. And I know that the kingdom of God is supposed to be a living daily reality, living under the rule and reign of Christ, the good rule of reign in Christ. And I think we're never ever going to get hit 100%, but the question is, do we want that? So that would kind of be a question I would have for people even today. You know, it's like, you kind of heard a lot of things, and sometimes people listen to podcasts for, like, you know, life hacks or like one thing, and we've talked about a few of those things. But in a bigger sense, what do you want? What do you really want for your kid? Do you really want them? You want them to be successful? What does that mean? All those things. You know, what does it mean for them to really truly? I remember one last anecdote. I just remember that with our kids, we didn't have a ton of money because we were both educators, and so money was really tight our whole life. Yeah. And so, but I remember saying to the kids, you can pick out any devotional you want as often as you want, and any Bible that you want as often as you want.
I like that.
And it was neat that, again, they did that, you know, and I would buy one for them, and I would spend money on that or whatever. And it wasn't, but what they remember from it is more, this must have been a real value for our dad. Yeah. Otherwise, knowing our situation, because we didn't give them a lot of stuff. Yeah. We really didn't, but because we couldn't. But that was almost like a blank check, almost, you know. And I think they intuited that without us ever saying it. That somehow this must be important. And that's just another way to kind of say, hey, this is a really big deal.
Yeah.
So just reminded me of
that's
that.
Really great.
Just a minute ago. So
did they ever take advantage and get like the leather bound
Bible?
I
don't know if they ever did. I don't think so. No, I would have said, no, you don't need a leather bound.
Yeah.
So anything is there's a caveat, right? Because you don't need leather.
Yeah.
So, but
it's really great though. They knew where your heart was.
I think that's the key, right? And so if our heart is bent toward Jesus and we want to grow to be more like Him, and we try to live that every day, then our kids often, not all the time in every case, but often will kind of connect with that and go forward. So big takeaway for today. So I'll ask you, what is your big takeaway? And maybe I'll do a big takeaway for today.
Honestly, my big takeaway is what we just talked about, just refocusing on the Lord. What is my definition of success? Just reevaluating that and letting them know what's most important to me, which is Him.
Yeah.
And I think, and then as a side note, working one-on-one with them, on their weaknesses.
Yes. That's good. And for me, I think it's just a reminder that schedules in themselves are not bad unless they're onerously and strictly create just hassles for people all the time for no reason. So some sort of a schedule with just reminding myself the block schedule idea can be helpful. They can move those blocks around, but it gives them agency. So that's kind of one of the things that I would take away from this that would be helpful. So we're not doing a podcast, an episode next week. Right. But the next one, you're flying solo.
I'm flying solo.
So tell us a little bit about that one.
Okay. Ashley Gaskins is going to be with me. And that's a definite, I think. We always get in trouble because we say...
That's true, we do.
Who's going to be next week, and then something happens. So just forgive us for that. But we are hoping to have Miss Ashley Gaskins on, and she's going to talk about tradition. She at CCS, she is a part of so many traditions. And we'll go into that.
And she's a teacher here.
She is a teacher. She's been a teacher for many years.
Okay, yeah.
And even at least one of her students is a current teacher here.
Yeah,
Mr. Williams.
Right?
Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, so she has a lot to say, and it's going to be really interesting.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening to this crazy conversation that we've had. We hope it's been helpful to you. And if you forget everything else we said, please remember that Jesus is Lord. Take care. Have a great week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gospel Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida. You can find us online at myccs.org.